All right, well, welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. It's about 4:30. I'm sure we'll have a few others joining us here as we get going, but I wanted to welcome you on behalf of OSTA to our first ever webcast. Woohoo! And it's great that we've got over 25 of us so far that are signed in. That's great. That's great. Welcome. We know it's difficult to get us together across the state geographically, so hopefully the Zoom platform will be a good way to do this. And over the next hour, we've invited Noelle Gorbett from the Oregon Department of Education to give us some information on the new Oregon Science Assessment. Before we dive in, I'd just like to let you know that you know you're big when you have your own hashtag. So we have a hashtag down here for OSTA Webcast, and also our Twitter handle. So you can tweet us out on the socials if you want to, and spread the word. At the end of the presentation, we will share some frequently asked questions. So you can look over those. You can send those out to whomever in your district needs to see them. Send them out to your team. All right. For those of you that are new to the Zoom platform, just a couple of quick buttons on your toolbar. Again, the microphone for muting and unmuting. There'll be some time for Q&A, but it really helps to minimize the background noise if you can keep yourself muted. Also, video, it's always nice to see a face on the other end. So if you have a webcam, you can start your video. And then finally, the chat button over here. We'll use that here in just a minute. But if you have questions or comments during the webcast, feel free to type them in there. And you also have the ability to message individual attendees. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so speaking of the chat window, I'd like to go ahead and get us started with some intros. So if you can open that chat window at the bottom and just type in your name, your district, and what your role is. So I am Andy Byerley. I work in the Hillsborough School District. I'm a high school science and math TOSA. I'm also a regional director for the Oregon Science Teachers Association. And I'd also, since we're doing introductions, would like to give Leah Plack a chance to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leah, and I'm the Communications Director for OSTA. So if you are a member, you probably get the newsletter every month, and I'm responsible for putting that out. I'm also right now working with the Portland Metro STEM Partnership with some early learning hubs on STEM and early learning. And I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this meeting. Just as a heads up, we're going to have the recording available to members on our website, so be on the lookout for that.
All right. Thanks for the reminder to make sure I'm recording, Leah.
I only do it because I always forget. And so that was my one goal, was to not forget this time.
Yep. All right, so normally it shows me that it's recording. Oh, I'm recording. Okay, good. All right. So hopefully you got a chat window to pop up there. While we're getting everyone's introductions in the chat window, I just want to say a couple of words about OSTA. So we are an organization that exists for teachers, and we are committed to improving the quality of the science experience for the learners in the state of Oregon. We're also committed to helping teachers get what we need to do the job that is before us. So we've had a couple of big changes over the past couple of years. These things called NGSS. Science has a new assessment now to go along with that. It's a great value to join. So I've got a link there on the screen. It's $25 for 1 year, or you get a discount for 2 years at once. And what do you get for that membership? Well, as Leah said, the TOAST, the Oregon Science Teacher Newsletter, which is amazing and chock full of resources for you. It also gets you a discount on registration for our annual conference. This year's conference is going to be at Lane Community College in Eugene. The 2020 conference will be heading to Bend. And then the 2021 conference will be an NSTA regional in Portland. So we're definitely going to be spreading around the state here. You also get some professional learning and networking opportunities that are regional, and we're seeing a lot more coming through Zoom. And there's a whole host of NSTA resources that are available to you as well. So again, make sure that you, if you haven't already done so, sign up for an OSTA membership. All right. Well, I would like to introduce Noelle Gorbett, and I will let her do that. But I just want to say that I have known Noelle for many years now, and it's been great to see the work that you've done across the state, and I look forward to hearing about the assessment now. I'm going to turn it over to you and
thanks, Andy.
Stop sharing my screen.
And I guess I'll start sharing mine.
Perfect.
Hey, Andy.
Yes.
This is Donna Rainbow. Hey, I'm trying to join via Zoom, and I see several other people trying to do that too, and the link is not working for us.
Oh, interesting.
We get a message back that says invalid link.
Okay, I'm going to let Noelle go ahead and get started, and I will send you the link to get in, and you can forward that out to those that are also trying to get in, okay?
All right, great, thank you.
All right.
Okay, I'm having just a little bit of trouble. Can you see my presentation?
We got it.
Okay. All right. Well, I just first of all want to start by thanking the Oregon Science Teachers Association, Andy Byerley and Leah for inviting me to share this information with everyone tonight. I'm so excited for this new assessment, and I really hope you are too. And again, I will answer the questions that have been posted on the shared Google Sheet throughout and at the end of the presentation, but I do welcome any additional questions. And so we'll get started. Okay. Oop. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide teachers with information about the 2018-2019 Oregon Science Assessment. We have some new enhancements, and then we also have things that have not changed. And so those are noted within the presentation as new and not changed as you're watching. Sorry, I'm just getting used to the platform. I apologize. Okay. Okay, so requirements and blueprint. Science assessment requirements. The science assessment is required to be given to every student in grades 5, 8, and 11. High school students may bank a passing high school assessment score in 8th grade, 9th grade, or 10th grade, fulfilling the 11th grade requirement. So notice the asterisk there when 8th grade students pass the high school science assessment. So this is 8th grade students who are targeting up. It's very rare that that happens, but it is a possibility. For the 2018-2019 science assessment, the test window opened on February 6th, yay. Students will only have one test opportunity this year, so this is a change. Students in the past have had multiple opportunities. The question was asked, will that continue in the future? And the answer to that is, I don't know. For this year, we only have one assessment, and that's because we have to set standards still. Students will not receive their score immediately upon completing the test. And again, that's because we have not undertaken standard setting yet. That comes at the close of the window this summer. We'll set the cut scores, present them to our state board, and then we'll be able to deliver scores to students in fall of 2019. So students have a 45 calendar day expiration period on their test. That is not changed from last year. So the 2018-2019 Oregon Science Assessment assesses the 2014 Oregon Science Standards as opposed to the previous test, which assessed the 2009 Science Standards. These are also the next generation science standards. The question has been asked, which standards are being assessed at which grade level. So the 5th grade science assessment contains items aligned to the 3rd through 5th grade Oregon Science Standards. The 8th grade science assessment contains items aligned to the 6th through 8th grade Oregon Science Standards, and the high school science assessment contains items aligned to all of the high school Oregon Science Standards. We're going to take a look at the blueprints, the blueprint for 5th grade. So we have the 3-dimensional reporting categories of 3-dimensional physical science, 3-dimensional life science, and 3-dimensional earth science. For each of these reporting categories, students will receive 1 to 2 cluster items. These are the task-like items. They're longer for a total of 4 items. So if a student receives 2 in the physical science category, they would only receive 1 in life and 1 in earth. And that is randomized. So every student would receive something a little different. The number of operational standalone items, these are the shorter items that have only a couple, 1 to 4 questions. Students will receive 4 to 5 of these item types in each of the categories for a total of 13 to 14 items. For 8th grade, students would receive 1 to 2 cluster type items for a total of 5 items. So they'll have 2 categories in which they receive 2 clusters and 1 category, oops, I apologize. And 1 category where they receive only 1, and a total of 12 to 13 standalone independent items. And the high school blueprint, students will receive 2 clusters in each reporting category and 4 standalone independent items. So they have 6 cluster items and 12 standalone items total for the test. Here are the constraints for all science assessments. Each cluster task will be from a different disciplinary core idea. So when we say disciplinary core idea, we say PS1 is an example of one of the disciplinary core ideas, which would be structures and properties of matter. So students would receive only 1 task from each DCI. They wouldn't receive 2 tasks from the same DCI. Students will receive no more than 3 standalone independent items on their assessment from the same DCI. So they could see multiple short items from the same DCI, but then the next point we make is that students will not receive more than 1 item from each standard, from each performance expectation. All items will appear in random order, regardless of reporting category or type of item. So they could receive a physical science cluster first, followed by a life science standalone. So it is random in the order of presentation. Students will receive field test items. So these are items that are not counted towards their final score, but are being tested for inclusion in future tests.
Noelle, I'm going to interrupt for just a second.
Sure.
Those that haven't muted, if you could mute your microphone, we're picking up just a little bit of background noise. Thanks.
Thank you. So the scoring for the new assessment, individual students will receive a composite science score in fall of 2019. So for sure, they're going to get a composite score. They may also receive category scores. Group level scores may consist of DCI relative to performance, strength or weakness. And I'll show you a little bit more about that here in just a second. And in the future, group level scores may contain relative performance by standard, although we project that to be at least a couple of years out. So here's just a visual of the reporting categories. Three-dimensional physical, three-dimensional life, three-dimensional earth. It's important to notice that within each category are all three dimensions. So when you look at the score, it's representing not only their content knowledge, but also their ability to use science and engineering practices and make connections with cross-cutting concepts. So when we say students would receive in groups, so this is like at the institution level, like the school level or the district level, information that they would receive would be relative to proficiency or relative to test as a whole. So as you look at your group of students, you would see, well, relative to what we consider to be proficient on the test, this particular group of students is performing better, so they're exceeding proficiency, or they are equal to proficiency, or if there's a negative symbol there, that would mean they are not scoring as proficient in that particular DCI, let's say, because here we have a list of the DCIs. When we say performance relative to the test as a whole, we're looking at this group and their total performance on the test, and this shows areas of strength or weakness. So relative to their total performance on the test, maybe they performed more strongly in energy, and maybe they performed less strongly in earth systems. So this is how we can expect to see information about group performance by disciplinary core idea. And we're hoping to provide this information this year, but it's not guaranteed. We want to make sure all of our reporting is valid and can give you very strong information. We don't want there to be any, we don't want there to be too much wiggle room in the information you're receiving. So here are some item examples.
Noelle, we have a question from Leticia on that last comment. She says in the chat, can you explain a little more about the relative to the test as a whole? Is the whole grade level, school level, state?
So depending on how you pull the data for the group. So if the set of data that you're looking at is let's just say a class of students, your information would be posting relative to the students in that group or in that class. If you're pulling as a district, you could be looking at strengths and weaknesses for your district, and so maybe identify some areas of program strength and program weakness. Does that make sense? And if is it Leticia?
Yes.
If you have additional questions after this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me here at ODE, and I'll be happy to either talk with you on the phone or we can email some more. Okay. Okay. So item development. Items are developed collaboratively between the Oregon Department of Education, Oregon educators, Oregon Department of Education's test vendor, American Institute for Research, AIR, and ODE's collaborative state partners. Oregon Department of Education has signed a memorandum of understanding with several other states to share items. All of our items that are in our operational pool are reviewed by Oregon educators for recommendation of acceptance into the operational pool prior to them going in. So nothing is put into the pool from another state unless we've vetted that item. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the cluster task and standalone item types. And we're picking up a little bit of background noise. If everyone could make sure that they're muted. So cluster task and standalone independent items are designed to engage the student in grade appropriate, meaningful scientific activity aligned to a specific standard. So it's only one standard that the tasks are aligned to, not multiple. These tasks begin with a phenomenon or design problem that engages student interest and can be explained, modeled, investigated, or designed using the knowledge and skills described by the standard. Standalone items are brief with 1 to 2 interactions, whereas cluster task items are longer with more complex of an average of 8 to 10 interactions. And we do have item specifications available on the Oregon Department of Education Science Assessment webpage. There is a link here, and Andy, I don't know if you want a copy of this PowerPoint after we're finished. We do have a version of it posted to our website, but if OSTA would also like it, so that OSTA members can have all the links that are embedded, I'm happy to give that to you.
That's great. Thanks, Noelle.
So here is a screenshot of a cluster task item taken directly from our sample test. The sample test is available on the OAKS portal. So you go oaksportal.org. We kept the name OAKS, even though we've changed over to OSAS as our new acronym, Oregon Statewide Assessment System. We have the OAKS portal address still because many people have bookmarked the website, and so we didn't want to change that suddenly on folks this last year, and so it's still oaksportal.org. So this cluster task item shows on the left-hand side of the screen, you see what we call the stimulus. This is the background information that sets up the scenario or phenomenon that the student is interacting with as they complete their task. The student is always given the your task at the bottom of the stimulus area that tells them what they're going to need to do as they work through the interactions on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can enlarge by using the arrows that are in the top middle of the page there. You can use the arrows to enlarge one side of the screen or the other so the students can focus more closely on reading the stimulus or on answering the questions. As students go through the cluster item, they're engaging in all 3 dimensions of that standard. And you can see here there are some different types of interactions. If you're interested in seeing all of the interaction types that are possible on the assessment, those are also given in the resource area of the OAKS portal. Here's an image, a screenshot of a standalone independent item. So you can see here there are actually 3 little student interactions. So students still have to read the prompt containing the phenomenon information, so the scenario, and students would make selections from a drop-down menu that give them the names of the 3 locations. One is having the most rain, one is having the least rain, and then one in the middle. And again, this is directly from our sample test. We do have a new feature for students who need to take the test in Spanish. The Spanish toggle feature allows the student to switch back and forth between English and Spanish. So you would see the entire cluster presented in Spanish, and then they can use the button in the top right-hand corner of the screen that would allow them to switch to English and back. so they can go back and forth between the two languages. It is not translated word for word, it is translated from meaning. So they are going to lose like highlighting and masking and similar features because they would be highlighting different words maybe, or different information. So if you highlighted in Spanish and then you toggled over to English, the highlighting would disappear. But if you toggled back to Spanish, it would persist. It would be there again. So that's important for students to understand. And one of the things that teachers should be pointing out to students as they're working through the sample test, which is available in Spanish presentation.
Noelle, we have a question about this. Do all students have access to the Spanish toggle?
No, this has to be set up in TIDE. So Spanish presentation has to be selected for the student in TIDE.
Okay. Is that something that could be selected for every student?
You would have to talk with your district test coordinator or your whoever sets up your students for testing.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be entering the different accommodations or supports, the different supports for each student.
Okay, so that as a teacher administrating the test, we couldn't set that toggle. That has to go through our district testing coordinator?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. One good feature is that when a student scrolls down the page, their approximate location will be retained when they switch to the other language. So if they're working on Part D and they just want to check a term or just want to look at it in the other language to see if they understand it better in the other language, it should show the item in that approximate location when you switch to the other language. So here's the approximate location. No, that is the location. There is a little symbol there, but this screenshot doesn't have the symbol. I think it's of a little globe image, but that's where the toggle button is located for students who have presentation in Spanish. So this is the only test that we have the toggle feature, and it's because when we put this into stacked Spanish, which was the previous presentation in the OAKS test, there was just so much information on the page that it became difficult for students to navigate. And so our vendor came up with this toggle feature for us. Accessibility supports. So the Spanish toggle feature is an accessibility support. And we do have a manual that discusses all of the accessibility supports that are available to students. There are universal tools, which are features of the assessment that are available to all students. There are designated supports that an educator or team of educators with the student and parent can decide the student needs on their test. And then there are accommodations, and these are things that would appear on the student's IEP or 504 as something that they are needing for their test. Scratch paper. So this is new for this year. This is a change. In the past, we've had our test administrators would need to shred or destroy all scratch paper at the end of each test session. This year, test administrators are allowed to retain the scratch paper securely by having students mark some identifiable information on the paper, retaining it in a secure location, and then storing between test sessions. And this is so that if students are making notes through cluster items and they are not finished with the cluster, that they still have those notes and can pick right back up where they left off to continue to work on the cluster. Estimated time. So this is a frequently asked question also. This is an estimated time based on how long students spent answering items in field test questions during last year's administration. So for 5th grade and 8th grade, we're projecting 1 hour and 30 minutes of actual testing time at the 80th percentile. So for this is for 80% of your students. Some of your students will obviously finish more quickly. Some may take a little longer. But this is based on last year's field test data and does not account for time that students need to log in and get started in the test, and then log out and securely store scratch paper. So resources, we do have some resources available, and there are more resources in development. Currently, we have a sample test. Students should practice with the sample test to allow them to become more familiar with the structures of the items and the features of the online assessment platform. Sample tests are not intended to be used in an evaluative way. They're not designed to give the teacher or the student feedback on how well they would perform on an actual test. The blueprint is different. It just wouldn't give a good estimation of how well they could expect to perform on the actual test. There is a help section in the resources for the sample test. It will give you a list of available features that can be found on the sample test, point out features of the science assessment to students that are using the practice test. So students can view this help section and give an overview of the student interface. This particular image is not specific to science. Okay. We do have scoring guides available on the Oregon Department of Education Science Assessment webpage. These were created to allow teachers to see how items are scored to inform classroom practice. So for each item, it shows the stimulus and the actual questions that are being asked, and then gives the background scoring assertion or what the item is attempting to assess, and then also gives the scoring rubric in terms of the amount of points that are assigned for the different responses. And the great thing about looking at these scoring guideline documents is it allows teachers to have some insight as to the interdependency of the answers on the test. So one of the questions that we were asked last year as we were doing the field testing was, well, if a student makes a mistake, let's say on a simulation, and then they're answering all of their questions based on that simulation that they didn't perform correctly, are they then given a 0 for the entire cluster? And the answer is no. They're given points for performing practices correctly. So even if their simulation is giving them the wrong information, if their response to a question about that information is correct, given the information from the simulation, then they're given points for making that correct identification of their answer. And so in this way, we're not double penalizing students for making a mistake early on in the cluster. And when you look at those scoring guides, you can see how those dependencies are scored. So they give examples of the different scores that a student could be given. Yes, they are available now, Maggie. There are several drop-down menus on the science assessment webpage, and within those are all of the resources that we're talking about here. So this is a short list. Here are the different resources that we do have on the webpage, and this blue hyperlink will take you there. We have the grade band item specifications. So this is the information that item writers used to create the tasks and standalone items. And this can give you information about how they are viewing the boundaries of the performance expectation, the standard. So you can see how that's being interpreted in the item writing. We also have a blueprint summary, which is the same as we shared in this PowerPoint, that shows you the number of each type of item and what category they are appearing in this year's assessment. We also have a link to the OAKS portal and scoring guides for each grade band. So there's one for grade 5, one for grade 8, and one for high school. We have a list of the item type tutorials. So these are links to the video examples of the tutorials that students would use while they're taking a test to help them understand how to interact with each type of item. And then there's also a video link to a simulation example. Currently in the works, we also have some step-by-step walkthrough items that we have in development and hope to have available soon for guiding the teacher and the student to logging into the sample test, as well as a scavenger hunt type of document to be shared with students so that they can practice with the sample test. I apologize, these items are not available yet, but we hope to have them available in the next couple of weeks. Additional resources you might want to look at are the Oregon Accessibility Manual. So this is the entire manual for all of our tests that shows you all of the different supports that could be selected for a student, gives guidance for the selection of those supports, and the Test Administration Manual, which guides the administration of the science assessment.
I put a link to that assessment or the accessibility manual into the chat, as well as a link to the science assessment page.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. We're going to start going through the frequently asked questions. And if there are more questions, we'll try to answer them as they come up. So first one, what happens if the student needs to pause the test for more than 20 minutes when they are in the middle of working through a cluster task? So the student will be allowed to resume working on the cluster when they return to the test. All answer selections within that cluster will remain unlocked and can be changed. All answers for previously completed clusters and standalone items will be locked. Now that's if the student has paused the test for more than 20 minutes. If the student pauses for less than 20 minutes, the rule is the same as it was previously. They may review and change answers that they've already completed. Next question, will the test be adaptive to the types of questions that the students are getting correct, i.e. scoring more high in a specific domain because they are in high school biology, or will equal number of questions be given for all 4 domains at the high school level? So at the high school level, you can see that they are receiving an equal of number of questions for each reporting category. And the current OSAS science assessment is not adaptive to performance. Will the OSAS scores ever be a part of school report card or other state level measures of school performance? ODE reports participation and achievement by school, district, and student groups as a part of the annual public reporting of assessment in assessment group reports. At this time, science assessment results are not part of our accountability system. It is not possible to predict if this might change in the future. Can students take the test in 9th and/or 10th grade as a practice test? 9th and 10th grade students are currently eligible to take the OSAS science test, but the purpose is not for practice. Rather, the purpose is intended for advanced students who have covered all of the assessed content. Districts should keep in mind the goal of decreasing the number of hours students spend testing and reserve early testing for those described, so students who are advanced. Do high school students have to test in 11th grade? 11th grade is the year of accountability for the science assessment. Answer, all 11th grade students participate unless they have a previously banked passing score, or they have submitted and the district has accepted their request for exemption for religious or disability reasons pursuant to OAR 581-022-1910. What test supports are there for English language learners, if any? In an effort to ensure all students are provided with the supports needed, Oregon Department of Education has made the science assessment at grades 5, 8, and high school available in Spanish. More information is detailed in OAR 581-002-0025, which describes a requirement for ODE to provide translated assessments as practicable for student groups that are composed of at least 9% of the student population. Is there a way to have the test highlight the next question to guide students through it? I found some of the questions difficult to navigate since you must complete every part before it will allow you to move on. If the parts requiring an answer were highlighted or something like that, I think students would be able to navigate the exam easier and faster. This is a great suggestion. We are currently working with our test delivery vendor to determine if this is a technical possibility for future tests. When will the practice test on the ODE website be updated? The practice test was last updated February 6, 2019, so just this last week. And the next update is to be determined, but we know that there will be updates, and we can post those updates on our website so that you know it's been updated. Will answers for the practice test be available? The scoring guides for the sample test are currently undergoing revision to match the most recent update, just this last week, and some items are currently available on the Oregon Department of Education Science Assessment webpage so that teachers may see scoring information. These are not meant to be used for evaluation as keys for scoring students in the sample tests. Why doesn't the practice test give a score at the end? Students need that level of feedback if they score well, if they are to score well on the actual OSAS. Sample tests are meant to give students practice with the format of the assessment, including item types and available tools. They are not weighted for content to match the blueprint of the operational science assessment, and therefore any score that it could provide would not be representative of how the student would expect to score on the actual test. The best feedback students can receive is from their performance in their classroom when instruction is aligned to the standards. If NGSS is designed as a 4-year program, but only 3 years of science are required in Oregon, will priority standards be identified at the state level to help guide instruction? Currently, there are no prioritized standards for science, and it's not on the agenda to be doing that work at any time that we can foresee. How are you advising high schools to prepare their students for the OSAS science test when most of the ETS and ESS PEs are typically omitted in high school sequences? I would refer you to look at Appendix K of NGSS, which offers model course maps that districts may use when planning their instructional sequences for high school.
And before we leave that question, I want to make sure we don't lose anyone with those acronyms. So ETS would be the engineering standards, correct?
Yes, and ESS is Earth and Space Science.
Perfect. And PE is performance expectations.
Correct. And with that, let's go through. Are there any additional questions, Andy, from our chat? Will the assessment eventually become adaptive? Possibly.
I think that was probably the second FAQ that you displayed.
Okay. But not at this time. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Others, if you guys have others, feel free to either unmute and ask or to type it into the chat.
Hi, Kelly. No, there is not a retake this year. I did have a question earlier. Someone asked, well, if they take it as a 10th grader and they don't receive a proficient score, can they retake it their 11th grade year? Yes. They just can only take it one time each school year.
Noelle, there's a couple of questions that have been added to our FAQ Google Doc.
Okay.
One of them is, will the test function on iPads, or do they need to use computers in order to navigate it properly?
Yes, it will function on iPads, but please keep in mind what students are used to using. We don't want students to be using an iPad for the first time for the operational assessment, so they should practice with the iPad prior to using it for the actual test.
Okay. The next one on here, what are the guidelines for people who read the test to those who have that as part of their IEP?
So their text-to-speech is available on the test. It does have to be selected in advance. The read aloud guidelines are available in the accessibility manual, otherwise known as the OAM. And I believe Andy linked that document for everybody. And if you have specific questions about that, please feel free to contact me via email. I'll be happy to help you navigate that document.
Okay. Another question in the chat, when will the scores be finalized? I know it won't be until the fall, but any more specifics?
I don't know. The cut scores have to go to the state board and be approved by the state board before we can release those results.
I know another question that didn't end up in our Google Doc, or perhaps I missed it. Are there any changes at this time to the local performance assessments for science inquiry or engineering design?
Not yet, but we are working on it. We have a committee working on it right now. So look for that in the future, but it won't be this school year, unfortunately.
Okay. Other questions?
So this is from Leticia again. In terms of the simulations, if the student did not finish the cluster, are they able to go back and run the sim or virtual experiment again? Yes, that part of the item will remain open, even if the test is paused for more than 20 minutes.
Noelle, a couple of others that are coming up on the Google Doc. What's the average amount of time that a test should take at each level?
Earlier in the presentation, we shared that it's approximately, and this is based on the data we have from last year's field testing items, an hour and a half of actual test taking time for 5th grade and 8th grade, slightly longer than that, an hour and 35 minutes for high school.
Okay. Okay. You may have answered this one as well. What level of data will be reported back to teachers?
So for sure, students would receive a composite score. So for each student, they get one composite score. We are also striving to also provide category scores. So that would be 3-dimensional physical science, 3-dimensional life, 3-dimensional earth space. But remember, within that is embedded all 3 dimensions. So it's not just the content of physical science. It's the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts that fall within those performance expectations or standards as well.
Okay. We've got a question here that relates to the practice test. Will the virtual experiments or the simulations allow for students to rerun them within the same testing time, or are there a limited number of times they can rerun the experiment? And the example given is that the sample test only allows for 3 trials in the Moore's hardness scale.
So that depends on, pardon me, that depends on what the item is trying to assess. So if the item is trying to assess, let's say, experimental design, they may only offer a student a limited number of opportunities to get data out of the simulation. It's because if they just kept running the simulation every which way that they could, they would eventually get all the data that the simulation could provide, therefore kind of negating the idea of designing that experiment. My district is considering a major science curriculum adoption. Is there a particular publisher that ODE feels is more closely aligned to the new OSAS as compared to others? Cyrus, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that question. We have not vetted any curriculum materials specifically to compare to the OSAS science assessment. But I will say, if your instruction is aligning to standards and it's phenomena-based instruction, I would say that that is more closely aligned to OSAS than maybe a more direct instruction, fact-based science class. There really is a greater emphasis on practices.
Can you, Noelle, can you elaborate on that a little bit? What does that emphasis on practices look like?
As opposed to memorization of content. So in
Okay.
previous tests, you could just get, a prompt that would ask a student to have a one word or one sentence response that's really based in like their understanding of scientific fact and may not have been examining the student's ability to perform a scientific test or analyze data necessarily, and particularly within one task. So not only are they designing the experiment, but then they're also analyzing the data from that experiment and coming to some conclusions where they're tying evidence to claim. So that's the type of skill that this new test really emphasizes, as opposed to just fact-based memorization.
Friends, we have about 5 minutes left for any other questions. Might the Q&A review be made available to all of us in a PDF? Yes, we will work with Noelle to capture
Absolutely.
not only the FAQs and her slides, but the ones that have been asked here.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll house these materials on the OSTA website. So we'll provide a link. We'll follow up with all of you once we collect your email addresses, and we'll provide a link where you can find those materials.
So very important reminder, as we're giving this test to students, to please cover up or remove instructional visual stimuli and posters, including content-related information and questions that might be on the board in the testing environment prior to testing, to prevent testing improprieties. This is one of the leading causes of improprieties, and it breaks our heart every time this happens for students. So please, please, please remember to cover up that material. And here's my web address. Thank you everybody so much. If you need to get in contact with me, email is typically the best way, just in case I'm traveling around the state working with folks. So noelle.gorbett@state.or.us. All
right. Friends, I just put a link to, it's a bit.ly link actually, to a Google form. We would love, love, love to get your feedback, again, since this is our first ever webcast. And this will also be, for those of you that would like a PDU certificate from OSTA, we're happy to generate that for you. We also would love to collect your ideas for future webcasts and what would be useful. So again, just to recap, we will follow up. You'll have a chance to leave your email with us in that Google form. We will follow up with anyone who does so with the frequently asked questions from Noelle, with her slides, any of the others that were done, afterwards. And again, just thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. The PDUs this time are available to OSTA members, and we're working on, for the next webcast, charging a nominal fee to non-members just to cover the time of generating the certificates. And our next webcast is going to be March 11th. And at the same time, and we're going to have Susan Holbeck and Berkeley Gadbach presenting about how to NGSSify your instruction. So keep checking our website. I'm about to finish posting information about that, but hopefully you'll be able to join us next month.
Yeah, a little teaser on that. If you haven't had a chance to attend the PD that Susan and Berkeley offer or attend their session at the last OSTA conference, it is awesome. You will definitely want to tune in. All right, anybody else have any last questions before we sign off?
Thanks everyone for being here in the afternoon/evening. We really are excited to connect with you all. And many thanks, Noelle, for all the work that went into preparing the presentation and answering all
Thank
these
you.
questions. And
Woo! Thanks,
we're so
Noelle.
excited we could make this happen.
All right. I'll paste the link one more time to the form in case anyone hasn't clicked it yet. And with that, we will sign off for the evening. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you March 11th. That's a Monday afternoon, 4:30 for Susan and Berkeley.
And Andy.